how to set your lineup and work the waiver wire during the first 2 weeks of the season. Plus, how fantasy managers should handle Fernando Tatis on the trading front right now. We'll do waiver wire, pitcher preview, mailbag, and more with guest Glenn Colton next on Beat the Shift. Welcome to another episode of the Beat the Shift podcast. I am your host, Ariel Cohen, and with me as always is Ruvain Guy. How are you, Ruvain?
I'm doing great. How are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good. Witnessed a hit-by-pitch walk-off where it was really a strike thrown. Did you see the Met game today earlier?
I did, and I realized from now on, as long as you put your elbow into it, you usually win, but actually it'll depend on the judge. That's what I learned from this game.
Crazy. But, you know, with the Mets, I tend to find that they have pretty bad luck in general, so I'm good with getting one break. I don't know if you're a pessimistic Met fan like me with that.
Always hoping for the best, but expecting the worst. That's the way we are.
That's the way we roll as Met fans. Well,
Yes.
Well said, Ruvain. Joining us today from the Colton and the Wolfman show on Sirius XM Fantasy Radio and Fantasy Alarm, please welcome Glenn Colton. How are you, Glenn?
Doing very well. Thrilled to be on with you guys again. It has been way too long.
Yeah, fantastic. Just with last year, with the whole 60-game season, it feels like there's been some kind of void from everyone seeing each other and everyone getting together and talking with each other. I really feel I missed something in the last 2 years.
Oh, definitely. So this is the first year I haven't traveled to go to a labor draft since 2002. I've been going to either Arizona or Florida, basically 20 years in a row. And this year it's a complete void where I just spent, 30 hours on the telephone with the Wolfman getting ready and actually doing salary cap drafts.
Yeah, but I'm so glad to be back. Ruvain and I did one live auction this year. That was really exciting because everything else has been online, which is good, but not as great. I much prefer the live versions.
It felt normal. That's what it did. It felt normal.
Yeah, I can't wait. And, we could do a whole podcast on the difference between auction strategies when you're in the room and not. But it's really hard to do that, read the tells of your opponents and to do nonverbal bidding and all that stuff which I think we're pretty good at. That's just out the window when you're doing the online version.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I try to hypnotize my opponents, if you can believe that. You certainly can't do that online. It just doesn't work, for obvious reasons.
Yeah, you can. I mean, one of my favorite things to do is when I go to two on a pitcher that Eno Saris of The Athletic really loves, and then he can't bid three because he doesn't have the money, and I just look at him and I just wink at him, and he just gets so upset. He's a phenomenal player and a great guy, so it's just fun.
Yeah, well, hopefully 2022 we'll get that back. By the way, it's been a week since we started and we had the draft season. Do you have any regrets that players that you drafted that you're like, oh, why was I overexposed to this guy? Why did I spend 5 leagues? I roster a certain person, or do you have any regrets from the draft season?
I have some regrets, not because I have too many shares of a particular player, because the way in which Rick and I do our drafts is we basically eliminate so many players that we don't want. It's not that, okay, if Aaron Judge is a $40 player, it's not like we wouldn't invest 20, but we just know he'll never get him at 20, so we don't spend any time on him, that kind of thing. So the players we end up with are largely the players we want. I'll tell you in October whether we wanted the right players or not. But my biggest regret is I have a number of teams where I didn't get one of the top 4 or 5 closers, one of the very few pitchers in Major League Baseball that are going to close. We did a whole thing with Jen Piacente and Steve Gardner on the Colton Wolf this week, going roundtable. Who do you count on as a closer? And the list was very, very short. So I would have liked to have more Chapman, more Diaz, even more Ryan Presley. And there are some teams where I'm just going to be doing spitting and scotch tape the whole year.
Yeah, no doubt. And I heard that segment that you did on Sirius XM the other day. I have Edwin Diaz on every single team that I have, pretty much, except for the one that I'm playing you in GDD. A little bit different
Nice.
because that's a daily lineups league, so it's a little bit different.
Well, I'll make you feel better. GDD, our closer was Trevor Rosenthal, so that did
Oh,
not work out.
Yikes.
And it's there's no Fab reclaim in that league. So
right.
the good news is in Tout Wars we have a $4 Jake Diekman. So
Perfect.
the injury gods giveth and taketh away.
Yeah, that's what happens. But on average, hopefully, we do well. Ruben, any regrets for you from this season?
Yeah, I think as if both of us together, I think we have too many. We drafted too many guys who were injured or possibility of injuries, and it's really showing itself right now. Like we were talking before the show about how we're a little bit concerned about how not great we're doing right now. But a lot of it has to do with the fact that we have a lot of guys who are injured. Like we have a lot of shares of Cole Calhoun. We have shares of Denelson Lamet who hasn't played yet. We even have some shares of Nate Pearson just because we think he's going to come back, and we think we got a good price on him. But having them now, it's very, very hard to watch your team flounder and just wait for those guys to come back. I think that's one issue. Another issue is, again, we have to be Met fans, but we have a lot of Mets on our team just because the values seem to have been there. And again, having a lot of players from one team, the Mets missed the first weekend of the season because of COVID, because of the Nationals. And you know what? We've fallen behind in the stat category for every single one. And not only that, those games are going to be made up with 7-inning games instead of 9-inning games. And it's just a lot tougher to come back from that.
Yeah, that Mets anomaly, though, truly was an anomaly. We usually make it a point not to take Mets or Yankees.
Yeah, but it just happened that the way the numbers fell out, we have a lot of shares of Diaz. We have a lot of shares of Jeff McNeil because we wanted to shore up our batting average, that type of thing. And right now, those guys are not doing what they were supposed to do.
Yeah, for us, we're also a little bit overexposed to Trent Grisham. We didn't know the extent of the injury there. He seemed to have a pretty good price for steals. Usually, you have to overpay for steals. He was pretty reasonable, so that was a little bit of an issue. But I don't have any big regrets. I think I don't have enough shares of Jake McGee. He's somebody who was really cheap that I think is going to get a couple saves in the first month for sure. So that's somebody I would have liked to have more. Our strategy section today. I want to talk about using preseason projections and what period of time do we still count on them? I mean, most of us, I know we do, we take the ATC projections and, we do some alterations, but by and large, we use them as our base. And now you come to the season, you already have your team. The question is, at what point do you throw them out? At what point do you still try to use the projections and say, hey, wait a minute, I spent all off-season preparing, and after 1 week, I'm not going to say that this guy is terrible. I spent so much time evaluating that he's good. Like, at what point do you rely less on your preseason evaluations and do you move to what's actually happening now or scouting reports, things like that? Glenn, what do you think?
Well, it's interesting. I'm not a big projections guy. I will use them as a tool. I love your system, Ariel, the ATC, and Derek Carty's the bat. And I will certainly look at what you guys are projecting for a player. And sometimes the number will surprise me and I'll dig into why, because usually you guys have a pretty good reason to why you come to a particular result. But our team, Rick Wolf, is much more of a projections guy, and I'm much more of a soft data and looking for trends and looking for guys who are going to pop or guys who are going to way underperform. So I don't worry about the preseason projections once the season starts at all. What I do really try hard to do is not get away from my preseason evaluations. Just to give you a classic example, I believed in, especially in deep AL only leagues, Kyle Gibson, having both in labor and tout wars. I like the ballpark. There's a lot of things to like in the ground ball rate historically, in the swing strike rate historically, and he got bombed out in the first start. It was a disaster, but you kind of hold the line. This is a guy you could cut. It didn't do it. Came out and pitched a very good game the second time. So really trying very hard not to overreact in the short term. That's the biggest thing. If you did 2-3 months worth of homework, you liked a guy for reasons, stick with it more than a week.
Right. Ruvain, do you feel that way? And maybe is there a distinction for you between guys who are starting hot versus guys who are starting really cold?
Well, for the projection thing, it's really depending on how your team is constructed. If you have a lot of if you go for a lot of prospects, then you know what, maybe you'll have a little more patience with the team. But when you have more of a veteran, quote unquote veteran team where you don't take too many risks, then you get a little bit more concerned. You get a little bit nervous. Usually, the hitters you want to wait about a month. You'll have an idea about a month or so in. You'll know exactly what you're getting from the hitter. I mean, there are the exceptions to the rule, like Matt Carpenter a couple of years ago when he didn't hit for the first 2 months, and all of a sudden he made his salsa, and then he was perfect. But then you have the guys like this year, Akil Badu, Nate Lowe. They're doing stuff. They don't really have that much of a track record. How do you know if they're going to keep it up for the whole year? This may be a couple of weeks, it may be a couple of months they do it. You have no idea. And are you going to spend so much money of your fab to pick these up? Because a lot of Nate Lowe may not be available as much leagues, but Akil Badu, he's been available. He wasn't even drafted in most leagues, so you can't really go by the projections for those guys because they're already breaking the mold of what the projections are supposed to be.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I'd say about a month is about the right time where I start switching more to more in season only valuation. For me, if a player is slumping and I can make a case to see his BABIP really low as a hitter, is that something? Maybe his strikeout and walk rate seems reasonable, but he's having bad luck. I'll give the benefit of the doubt and go back to what the projections say for about a month's time. For pitchers, about four to five starts. It really gives you a good idea. Strikeouts and walks stabilize pretty well after about 4 or 5 starts for a pitcher, and that to me is the best indication. I mean, if you want to pick up a guy off the waiver wire, I just sort by K minus BB, and that gives you your very one click, one stop. Pick up a good guy to get. That gives you really good indication. But yeah, I don't just revert to what's going on now. But on the other hand, if you miss some hot start by a player in the first 2 weeks and somebody else snatches them up, you might be missing out on a game changer. So while I won't dismiss projections, if I didn't really recognize a player, I mean, like you, Glenn, I don't go through every single player. I don't have time. We start with the ATC projections and use the market as a tool to say, well, there's no way we're going to go anywhere near this player. It's so much lower in the market. The market is so much higher than the ATC projection. But there's some players that we don't know. Badu, I really didn't recognize him before, but you got to at least turn your head and look at what he's doing. Cedric Mullins was pretty low on projections, but he's got the leadoff spot in Baltimore. So you have to recognize that. And remember, this is now in season. So I'd say in addition to just calling it projections versus in season, I think the playing time is a big distinction that you got to look right away. The role does the closer have the role? Is the guy batting second? Jorge Polanco is another example of a player who pretty low in draft boards, but look where he's batting in the Minnesota lineup, and he looks pretty good so far. Things like that you have to pick up and be able to go off of what your preseason notion is really quickly.
Yeah, I'll jump in here and I'll say I agree with what you're saying, but you got to be careful that you really dig a little bit deeper than saying, okay, Polanco is hitting second. Yeah, but, Buxton spent time on the shelf. Kepler's been banged up. Donaldson is hurt. So is he really going to keep that spot when these guys come back? And by the way, Nelson Cruz couldn't play in the first series because it was in the National League Park. So there are a lot of reasons in my mind to question whether Polanco is going to hold that spot. Because they've had injuries, but your point about looking to see if somebody has established a new role, or maybe has a new skill, a new pitch, has their exit velocity back, has their fastball velocity back. Those are things that I think are really interesting. And also, we tend to discount spring performance. I'm trying to remember who the player was. I think it was Yonder Alonso, who a few springs back raised his launch angle dramatically. And to me, it's like, okay, he did that in the Cactus League. So what? When it's starting to show up in the regular season, you say, this might be a different player.
Yeah. Fair point on Polanco, by the way. But of course, Byron Buxton will stay healthy all season long. Of course
He will.
Well, my labor team certainly hopes so.
Yes. But yeah, no, fair point about that. But again, use the example I gave more as a what should you do, even if you don't agree exactly with the person. Pitcher velocity. Taijuan Walker today up about 2-3 miles an hour from last year. which is a fantastic sign. And he looked great today. Things like that.
He
You know.
did. Let me ask you guys, do you think the guns are running hot? I mean, I watch obviously a lot of baseball, and it kind of feels to me like the guns are a little high. They're running a little hot. You
Never
know,
really
like
thought about that.
Shohei Ohtani over 100 miles an hour over and over again. I mean, he was throwing hard, but it didn't look like he was throwing like Chapman.
Yeah. I don't have the definitive proof to tell you otherwise. I mean, I've seen people who have had velocity declines year over year, so it's not like everybody is going one direction. But yeah, if I had to estimate, I'd say it feels a tad hot. It does.
Yeah, just watch out, folks, because if you see, so and so player's up half a mile per hour or a mile per hour, it might not be telling you as much as you think it is. That's really the only point I'm making.
Now, one thing also I think we should learn from what's going on in the early part of the season, a lot of these players who are excelling right now have been Rule 5 picks, Rule 5 draft picks. And a lot of times they have to stay on the roster, otherwise they have to return to the team. The guy, Mercedes from the White Sox, he was a Rule 5 guy. Badul, he was a Rule 5 guy. These guys are going to staying on the roster. So they're going to have some sort of a role because the teams like them and they pick them out. So, sometimes we have to watch out. I think this is for the future years that if we see someone's a Rule 5 pick and they're getting, they're going to get an opportunity to play because they're going to be on the roster, they can't get kicked off, they can't get sent down or anything like that. Maybe those guys are some of the guys we should watch more in spring training or keep an eye on more just to see how they're going to get what type of role they're going to have on their team.
A great point from Ruvain, I would say, take it a step further. A Rule 5 guy on a team that's projected to be bad, like Detroit, has even more motivation to let him play.
Oh, 1,000%. I mean, in general, prospects are going to look a little bit different this year because they didn't have the minors last year. You might have some people who developed in the alternate sites that you have no idea about, and you don't know what their progression was because we don't have the minor league stats. There was none. So you're going to see some jumps in ability that you wouldn't be able to project or know about, but you'll see it because it happened while they were at the alternate sites, things like that. Talk about trading. I know a lot of people love to trade. It's their game. I actually just played tennis the other night with Ian Kahn.
Did you?
I did. Yeah, he invited me up
Nice.
to his place in not upstate New York. He lives in the Bronx. So, but I live in West Hempstead, Long Island.
Who won?
Huh?
Who won?
Who won?
Yeah.
Somebody won. I don't know.
Oh, okay. Okay.
He won. He's a pretty good tennis player. I am far less good a tennis player. But anyways, I mentioned him because he is a big trader, and I'm sure he's working on schemes right now to trade. My question to you is, are you a big trader, and what are you looking to accomplish post draft and in the first 2 weeks of the season? Is there anything that you're looking for to do?
I don't usually make a lot of trades in the first few weeks of the season, with a couple of exceptions. If you have a big injury, then you sort of your team is different than what you expected it to be, or if you came out of the draft knowing you had a hole. Those are times where I might look to do it. Or in a third situation where one of your late picks became something different than what you expected. I'll just make this up. If you would have drafted an Edwin Diaz and Aroldis Chapman, and you also have Reyes, now you've got more saves than you thought you had. It's a time to try to unload some of that and get value for it. But generally, I don't try to trade early on because most of the time we go into drafts and auctions with a plan. We follow the plan. We accomplish the plan. So at least in the first few weeks, we're still believing in the plan.
Yeah, and there's an information problem. I mean, if you paid $15 for a player at the auction, it means that you thought that he was worth $15 or more, and nobody else did. And conversely, somebody else paid $15 for a different player because you didn't think it was worth it. They did. So it's hard to trade like for like value because you all have different versions of what you think the valuation of a player is. The only thing I can see really so early on, other than injury, which we understand that could happen, is low-end positional or statistical flexibility. If you have maybe 3 corner infielders on your bench and somebody else is sitting with 3 middle infielders, why not swap one just so that you each can get more positional flexibility and help each other out and start the grounds for some good trade dialogue for later in the year. Or same thing, statistics. If you have possibly a power hitter and the other guy, you have a couple of power hitters, the other guy has a couple of speedsters, why not swap? But Ruvena, what about you? Any ideas about trading the first couple of weeks?
Yeah, just looking to bolster your roster depth. A lot of times at this time point of the season, I mean, there are so many injuries coming up already, so many holes that a lot of teams have that sometimes, if you don't have enough of corner infielders, may want to, take a risk on a corner infielder. You have to re-examine your bench and see what you have and see what you can work with for the next couple of weeks, because this is the time to get some of these players on the cheap. A lot of them, you get some of them on the cheap. Some of them you're not going to be at them. They're not going to be cheap later on. So you have to try to anticipate what the market's going to be based on the injury aspect of the entire MLB, which is so many people are getting hurt already. It's crazy. So you have to look at that and also look at the time frame. Right now, the prospects like Jared Kelenic, they're down. What's going to happen when he does get called up? Or do you have someone on your team that's going to lose playing time if he comes up, or any of the other prospects that toward the end of April, these guys may be off your team? You may want to think about getting rid of them if you think that another player is going to be called up. Try to anticipate what's going to happen. Try to be ahead of the market.
Before we talk about a little bit more about trading, there was a pretty serious injury. Fernando Tatis. Well, you know what? Before we do that, let's do the Injury Gurus trivia of the week.
Funny you should bring up Fernando Tatis because the trivia happens to be about Fernando Tatis. Last year, he played in 57 games during the shortened season. The question is, how many errors did he make during the course of the 57 games? Any idea?
Glenn?
Well, I'm not going to look it up as much as I obviously could. So I'm just going to stick my finger in the air and say 3.
You hit it right on the target.
Nice.
He had exactly 3 errors last year, the entire 57 games. The reason why I bring it up is because this year he's already have 5. 5 errors. And that's already more than 24 teams have for the entire season for now. Okay, just to put that in perspective, he has 2 fielding errors and 3 throwing errors. Now, the reason why I bring that up is because we all saw him get injured with a shoulder subluxation. It's happened 3 times to him in the past 3 weeks: fielding, diving, and now swinging. It's showing up more and more, and it's a chronic thing. I think it's going to be a chronic thing that's going to require surgery. You may be able to hide it in the swing where he doesn't have to swing as hard, but you're seeing it in the fielding. You're seeing that he's not throwing the way he's normally doing. He's not fielding the way he's doing, and he's a liability in the field, which makes me think that he's not going to be playing that much more this season. That's just my hunch on it, because number one, it's not good for the team because he's making all these errors. He's not swinging. He's going to be thinking about the shoulder every time he swings. And number two, they just signed him to this massive, massive contract. Yes, I know people are. You have to think long term. You have to think short term. You can rest this, but resting it, it's going to happen again unless it gets fixed.
Yeah, no, I take your word pretty seriously, Ruvena, on this thought, which thinks that. I think most of the market, or most people looking at the situation, I don't think is as pessimistic. I think people heard, oh, don't worry, he doesn't need surgery right now. Great, maybe he'll come back. Maybe he'll come back in 10 days. And I think that's a little bit too naive, but I would also venture that it's going to be longer than you think, but worse than that. What's he going to be when he comes back? I mean, you saw the 5 errors so far. He's not right. And after not being right in the first 5 games, then he did more damage and tore his labrum. I'm a little bit pessimistic. Any thoughts on that, Glenn, with what you make of the whole Tatis situation?
Well, we have absolutely no shares of Tatis. Fabulous talent, going to be a star in this league, I think, for a long time. But he had never played a full 162 game season, or even 140, 150 games. He hadn't produced a full season's worth of superstar stats. So to us, there was no way we were going to pass on an Acuna, on a Turner, on a Betts, on a Trout for Tatis. So we have none of that. So the fact that, a guy who's been getting hurt, get hurt again, I hate to see it, but I'm not surprised by it. So for us, we weren't willing to invest when he was healthy. So there's no chance we're investing now.
Right. If you were somebody who did own Tatis, which you weren't, and Ruben and I don't have any shares for pretty much the same reason. I mean, Mookie Betts, Juan Soto, those guys I much prefer top of the draft, and somebody else preferred Tatis every time. Certainly in an auction, I wasn't willing to go over $40, and he went for 50. If you were an owner right now, there's some point at which it makes sense to trade a player, and at some point it makes sense not to trade a player that you're just usurping too much value and you're out of it. What advice would you give to people on looking to make a trade? I mean, certainly if you're going to trade for Trey Turner, that's a slam dunk, right? Everyone would agree that. If you're going to trade for so Elvis Andrus, I mean, that's a no, because you're just forfeiting your entire value right then and there. The question is, where is the happy medium, and what would you be looking to accomplish that is realistic for Tatis if you're going to trade
You
him?
know, if you rostered him, you probably really love what he brings to the table. You're attached to what he brings to the table. So it's really hard emotionally to give up and only take, you know, 60% on the dollar or 50 cents on the dollar. But I think that's all you can probably get for him. I think that when you move 2 months from now and you can see where your team is really sitting with 4 months to go, and you'll know, okay, I've got a team that can win as is with small tinkering. Or I've got a team that really needs to catch lightning in a bottle to win. If it's the latter part, then I think you're willing to take a bigger gamble on rostering Tatis. Right now, I don't see him getting traded in fantasy leagues very much at all, because if you rostered him, you're still holding out hope that you get the real Tatis for 5 months, and your emotion is saying that's the case. So I don't see him moving a lot. I don't see a lot of people being able to pull it off. Keeper leagues, dynasty leagues, totally different.
Right, right. That's true. I did a poll on Twitter, and I asked the question to the market on both sides. I asked if you're a seller, what would you be willing to accept? 10 cents on the dollar, 50 cents, 80 cents on the dollar. Like, what is the least you'd accept? And I also asked it on the buyer side. If you had X, would you offer that person for Tatis? And I gave choices. Would you offer Lindor? Would you offer Tim Anderson, Javier Baez, Carlos Correa, all the way down to Tommy Edman? It's funny that what I see here is an opportunity for actually a good trading market. I think that the average seller would sell, you'd be surprised, for about 55 cents on the dollar. The average buyer is actually willing to trade for about a 67% discount. So they'll trade a Carlos Correa, they'll trade a Dansby Swanson type player for him. But on the other side, people I think, are going to be willing to accept somewhere on the order of about 55 cents. But not just the average numbers that I'm telling you. There's a big spread. We had a nice quarter of the people who are willing to trade all the way up top. Oh, sure, I'll do Lindor, no problem, to get Tatis. And on the bottom side, for the buyers, some people are willing to trade 10 cents on the dollar for him. I think I got about 40% of the crowd willing to trade for 33 cents or less. Being as it be, with a big spread in the market results and a pretty close average result, I think that if you wanted to look for a trade, you can find somebody in your league that's willing to give you something really, really good. I mean, personally, if I had Tatis, I'd be fine with about 55, 60 cents on the dollar, being that, I think that he's probably more hurt than other people think. I would love to have Gleyber Torres or Javier Baez. I would be willing to trade that. I mean, to me, there's sunk costs involved. Because he's injured, I mean, his value rest of season, you're losing 25 cents on the dollar right from the start. And to go the little bit more to get certainty. Remember, when you roster Tatis, it's because you want that certainty of stats at the top. If you're going to go from a certainty of stats to, I don't know what the heck I'm going to get, you're giving up a lot of risk you're adding a lot of risk on your team that your team probably can't handle. So I would be trading for about 55 cents on the dollar if I could.
What I would add is also, if you're going to try to trade him, I would trade him within the next week or two before any more news comes out. Because right now they're saying, oh, he doesn't need surgery. This is the time when you have to trade him. Because if you wait 2, 3 more weeks, some more news may come out saying that he's not progressing the way he wants, and then he may really opt for surgery, and then you're going to be really in trouble because you're not going to get anything for him. And let's say you see him on the waiver wire. What happens if someone says, you know what, I don't want to have to deal with this. I think he's going to need surgery, like someone like me, and I say, you know what, I'm going to drop him. Who's going to pick him up and have him on the roster and sit there? I'm sure a lot of people will. So that means that he does have some trade value out there.
Well, I would pick him up in a heartbeat if he was cut by someone. But the other thing, guys, the really important factor is what kind of league are you in? So I would be much more willing to take on, the risk of missing Tatis for 2 months, 3 months in a 12-team mixed league where maybe my shortstop would then for a couple of months be a Didi Gregorius type than I would in an NL only where it's not even going to be Brandon Crawford. It's going to be, somebody who doesn't play at all, basically.
Oh, 100%. Everything is always context dependent, and I totally agree with that. The smaller the league size, the replacement level goes up. That means that the difference between Tatis and the replacement is greater. It means that when you're trading, the value of Tatis sitting and doing nothing is greater, right? You'd need a lot more to make a trade in a 12-team league than in a 15-team mixed or in a mono league. That's 100% true. Obviously, polls out to Twitter is a very general sense, and everybody's playing in a different league just to get the idea, but 100% really depends on where you are. Let's talk a little bit about what you do in the first week in terms of setting your fantasy lineups. Does it differ for you, Glenn, what you're doing and you're accomplishing in your first week versus what you're doing later on in the year?
Oh, yeah. I mean, in a number of ways. I mean, later on in the year, you have to really be watching the categories. And, if you're ahead by 300 strikeouts, you're not chasing the strikeouts, you're managing your ratios, things like that. But at the beginning of the year, I am really looking at, especially on the pitching side, I'm much more willing to have many more relief pitchers and much more willing to have these guys who are going to come in the, fourth inning than I am when the season gets rolling. Because not that many pitchers are going to go 6, 7 innings and really maximize their chances for wins and big time strikeout levels. So I'm much more willing to go for the relief pitchers. And the other thing is, I want to avoid, if I can, the pitchers who are going to pitch in really bad weather at the beginning of the year. If you have Luis Castillo, you're going to pitch him. But it was pretty predictable that he might have a bad outing in super, super cold weather. So I try to watch out for pitchers I know are going to be pitching in really cold weather, especially pitchers who did not grow up in cold weather.
Yeah, no, all good points. I agree. Ruvain, anything to add?
Yeah, for the hitting aspect, I'd play all my regulars, not worry about anything except for rookies. Usually, rookies I tend to shy away from for the first week of the season because you don't know what you're going to get. Usually, for most guys, if the second year, third year, fourth year guys, you have a basic idea what you're going to get from them. Rookies, you don't know if you're going to have 2 home runs, 3 home runs a week, or they're going to hit 100 and then you put on the bench. Look at Andrew Vaughn. He's not getting that much playing time. People started him. They say, oh, he's going to start in left field. No one knows what you're going to get from him. No one knows what his true role is. If you stick with more known commodities during the first week for hitting, I think that works out. And to just build on Glenn's point a little bit, when you're talking about the middle relievers and starting that, you have to start as many closers as you can because right now they have the jobs. Jake McGee, he has a job. You got to play him. All these guys, even on the lower teams, you got to play them because this is the time when closers have the most job security, and this is when you can get the most out of them.
Yeah, and I'll put it in the context of risk and variance. Everyone says, closers are so variable. You don't know if they're going to start the year. You don't know if they're going to finish the year. Closers are highly variable. But baked in that, the variability is backloaded, right? At the start of the year, when they have the role, or at least, in a couple of years ago, everyone had a role, right? They have the role until they lose it. And even though they might be bad, they might still get the save, or at least they'll get the next couple of shots. I mean, Anthony Bass gave up another blown save today, but he might still get another shot at closing the game. So in terms of the variability, if it's backloaded, throw your closers out now and throw less starters now. You can always swap them later and have less closers later and more starters later. In fact, that's a good idea because I don't want a 6th, 7th starter in my roster who I don't know how they're throwing much other than spring training, really damaging my ERA in the very first week of the season. I'd rather have 5 starters, throw a couple of closers if you're able to draft an extra one, and plug the rest with middle relievers so that you keep your ratios as intact as you can, and you'll see as you go on, do you need more strikeouts? Well, throw in an extra starter. Maybe you need to throw in some extra 2-start pitchers. Maybe that'll help you, and you can do that because you've built up a nice base in the ERA and WHIP. So I will agree with that and play it that way as well. How does setting your fab claim amounts differ in the first week versus in the rest of the year? Do you have a different plan the first week versus what you do the rest of the year, or maybe I'll ask the question of how are you budgeting fabs in the month of April, if that's a better way to ask it?
Yeah, I mean, my view of that is don't go down the middle. Go big or go home. So you should really look and say, it's not that I have a full budget, because you're going to get players that are going to become closers. You're going to get them, these minor leaguers that come up, and you're going to want them. And of course, you're going to have the trades into the league in the middle of the season if you're in a mono league. So you either decide there's a player I really need and I'm going to just go out and spend, or just save your resources, but don't play it down the middle. So if you're a team with no saves, maybe you're a Rosenthal, a team that rostered Rosenthal or something like that, or Karinchak, who now doesn't look like he's closing. Maybe you say, okay, I'm going to blow out the budget for Reyes or Merriweather or something like that. But unless you see something you really, really need, don't just say, I have 100, so I'll just go 7 or 8 on this guy. Go big or go home.
All right, Ruven, you agree?
No, I'm actually complete opposite here. I like to save my money for later. I don't want to overreact and spend too much money now on a guy who may not have a role a month from now. This is a marathon. It's not a sprint. So I try to save my money. I mean, in my TGFBI league, someone spent $300 and something on Merriweather to close. He wasn't even the projected closer. Yes, he has good stuff and his numbers look great, but he's been a closer for all of 1 week, and you're spending almost a third of your budget on it. It makes no sense to me whatsoever. I understand. Okay, you have a closer now for now, and he's on a good team. That's great. But there'll be so many other opportunities to get closers. You're going to have so many other holes in your roster throughout the course of the year. I would save that money for later, unless you have a catastrophic injury. Like, let's say you do have Fernando Tatis and you need someone to fill them in. Need a filler there. Then I'd spend the money, big money on somebody. But otherwise, I'm holding my money. I'm going to be very conservative early on. And if I have a glaring need, then I'll be more aggressive early on.
Yeah, just to be clear, though, right? I didn't say I was going to blow out the budget. I said either do it or don't. I said don't put yourself in a hole by doing, a mid-level bid, which is still going to put you in 6th place in the most fab for a big guy coming in. Either if you're gonna put yourself in a hole, do it or not at all.
Being aggressive, either be aggressive or don't do it at all. That's what you're
correct.
Saying.
Okay.
Correct.
Yeah, we're going to talk a little bit more next week with Vlad Sedler about fab. I mean, for me, I always take a look at the economic approach and say, listen, you have draft capital that you've used. You also have fab capital. And for every dollar, I want to have a good return on investment. When you're bidding 30% of your fab on a closer, historically, you will not do well. You won't. And if you're doing that the first week of the season, when you don't know what your needs are going to be later on in the season, and who knows about Merriweather, and who knows if you're going to need another closer, that's just a very bad. You're not going to generate a good return on investment. I found that closers are best returned at some 10 to 15% maximum of your budget in the year. Of course, the cheaper way to get closers are because they come up during the year is to get somebody who's next in line, but grab him a few weeks earlier if you see somebody struggling, or hold somebody as a handcuff, like Mike Mayer on Los Angeles. He's pitching great so far. Iglesias probably is a closer, not pitching so great so far. He's going to be the next in line. Maybe if you have the room, you grab him now for free. And when you have a $1 purchase on your fab out of 1,000, your return on investment is going to be sky high, right? I always look at, I want the biggest return per my dollar spent. I bid on Merriweather. I did, but I threw out $30 out of my 1,000 because at $30, it is a good investment. I can get a good return. And all the closers, I threw out any of the potential closers for $30, $40. I was okay with not winning the award, but I wanted to keep any bid I have with a good return on investment. Remember, if every single bid that you have has a good return on investment over time, you're going to do well with your fab budget. Of course, there's needs in the season. You have an injury. You need a closer. You need somebody. So a portion of your fab budget should be spent on needs. For the rest of it, I like to use mine wisely and always try to save a little bit for the end so that you can have a little bit of a hammer in August and September to get those extra starts, those 2-start pitchers, and to have the hammer so you can get any need that really comes up at the end.
Now, there's one other thing I want to say about we're talking about these closers. This is an interesting fact, and I just want everyone to know this because this is very important. We played. There's been 1 week of the season so far. 36 different people have a save. 36, and as at the time of this taping, 5 teams haven't had any saves yet. So to put that in perspective, 36 players have saves out of 26 teams. So who has what role? Nobody knows what's going on right now. Everything is still so in flux, and if you're going to spend so much money on a closer now, just like you said, Ario, you're not going to get the return on investment because does he have the job? Does he have the job this week? Yes. Does he have it next week? You don't know because everything is just so in flux right now.
Which also props up the point that in your draft, the right strategy this year would have been go big or go home. Get that lockdown closer like Diaz, like Hendricks, like Chapman, or just take the little low stabs and take as many of them as you can. But don't go in that middle because it's just a bad return on investment area.
It's funny that you say that because our Tout Wars American League team we drafted 3 relief pitchers, all for a total, I think, of $9. It was Romano, Diekman, and Clase. So far, even though there's no saves there, it might work out.
Yeah, right. And if it doesn't, you only spent $9, so the rest of your money is spent elsewhere, right? You're going to get a good return on investment, especially in a mono league there, because they're going to give you good ratios at the very least. And I think that some of them, I think Clase is the guy in Cleveland, by the way. I think he's going to end up with the most saves.
I'm with you.
Yeah. And Diekman, I mean, Rosenthal's out of the way now, as you mentioned before. So I think that was the right thing to do because, again, the return on investment is return divided by investment. There's 2 ways to make it big. You have to have, a big return, which is hard to do, right? Or B, a small investment. When you throw $1 or $2 on anything, it can't fail. What are you going to do, cut him? Like, it can't fail. So you might as well put the stuff that has the worst profitability and just throw little dollars or throw the big dollars and bank that value.
And I actually put up a poll on Twitter today, and I asked, who are you more concerned about as closer? I put up, all 3 of these people had blown saves the other day: Devin Williams, James Karinchak, and Kenley Jansen. And over 500 people responded, and the response was mind-boggling. People were more concerned about Kenley Jansen than the other 2. Devin Williams, he only had, both of these guys, Devin Williams and James Karinchak, only pitched in a short season. So he only saw them for 2 months. You don't know exactly what you're going to get from those guys. They were really good in those 2 months. But my thing is, if they already both blew saves, I know they weren't both in the 9th inning. One was in the 7th, one was in the 8th, and I get that. But all 3 of them blew saves, and the known commodity, the Kenley Jansen, people are more concerned about him than about Karinchak, than about Devin Williams, which just blows my mind.
That's interesting.
I'm amazed.
Yeah. That's weird. I would not think that. I would think the total opposite. Yeah. All right, time for our waiver wire. That's where we talk about a couple of potential waiver wire pickups that you might be interested in next week. Let's start with you, Glenn. Who's somebody that you might want to think to snag with a couple of waiver wire dollars this week?
So I've mentioned a couple of these guys. I have two during the course of the podcast earlier. One is we just talked about him, Emmanuel Clase. I mean, he's averaging over 100 miles an hour on the fastball. The stuff is filthy, and he's just got better stuff than Whitgren. And they seem, based at least on early managerial usage, to trust him later more than Karinchak. So, I think in 2 weeks you'll never be able to get him. So if you want him, you got to get him now, if at all.
Clase was my waiver wire pick for last week on this show, so there you go.
I should have listened.
Yeah, totally agree.
I usually do, but I didn't last week. I apologize.
No, I definitely agree with that. Karinchak walks way too many batters. Clase has that 99, 100-mile-an-hour fastball. He's got the stuff, and the rest of his metrics are fantastic. I mean, he's the guy. I wholeheartedly believe that. Ruvain, how about you? Waiver wire person to pick up.
I actually have two. The first one you mentioned earlier is Cedric Mullins. He's hitting amazing right now. He's one of the hottest guys in baseball. He leads off. He hit his first homer earlier this week also, so he does give you some pop right there also. And he's only owned in 26% of CBS leagues. How that's possible? It's still the first week of the season, and he's in Baltimore, so people don't always believe in it right away. But he is in Baltimore, and the ball flies out of the stadium during the summer, so he's a guy I would definitely target to pick. Another guy is Colin Moran. We've mentioned before last year on this show. He's only owned in 25% of CBS leagues right now. He's eligible at first and third. He's very consistent. He may not have the sexiest line, but he's very consistent. So far this year, he's already batting 280. He's got a couple homers, couple RBIs. He's going to play every day. He's either going to play first or third. Last year, he was DH only. So now you have a little more flexibility with him, and he's not owned in a lot of leagues.
Yeah, Colin Moran, he plays for the Stinky Pirates, but when you're batting cleanup for any team in the major leagues, you're going to get your share of runs and RBIs. And remember, in 5x5 Roto, 40% of your offensive categories are runs and RBIs. Hence, Moran makes a lot of sense. I'll mention a couple of guys. We mentioned Badu. He's just interesting. What the heck? I'll go a couple from the top and the bottom. Evan Longoria got 3 homers so far in his first 6 games. He looks pretty hot. If you like playing the hot streak, he is your man. Tyler Naquin, 25% owned. 4 homers so far. I take the stab. I mentioned Cedric Mullins already. Only 30% owned on CBS. He's batting leadoff. He's 12 for 25 to start the year. And what he hasn't done so much is steal, but he will. He's going to be a great source for stolen bases. If you're even in a 12-team league, pick him up. And I like Miguel Rojas. He's 43% owned. He's batting right on second in the Marlins lineup. 2 stolen bases so far. Batting .278, just a guy that the Marlins really believe in, and should not be. I own him in a bunch of 15-team leagues. A very undervalued player.
I love the Cedric Mullins pick. We got him for we rostered him for $1 in AL Tout Wars. Took a little bit of a beating from the SiriusXM broadcast crew, talking about the weakness in our outfield and making fun of Cedric Mullins. And Michael A. Taylor, who would be another one I'd say, is someone to target. And they've both hit. Michael A. Taylor, this is one of those soft data changes. The swing is quicker. It's got less movement. It's faster to the ball. And, he always had the tools. So that's another one I would take a look at.
That's a great pick. I like that. Let's do some pitchers here. In our pitcher preview, that's where we highlight this coming week's either 2-start pitchers that look good or maybe a key 1-start matchup. Ruben, let's start with you. Is there a pitcher to highlight this week?
Yeah, I actually have 2 of them. First of all, I'm going to go for the deeper league. They're both for pretty deep. John Gant. He's a possible 2-start, and he's relief pitcher eligible. So if you have one of those spots that can only fit a relief pitcher, and you want to put a relief pitcher who starts, he's great. The only question is, how long is he going to pitch? In his season opener, he only pitched 4 innings, but he only gave up 1 unearned run. He did walk 3. So he is a possibility. He's on a decent team. The Cardinals are going to be pretty good this year. So there's a good chance that he's going to go well, but the question is how well and how far he's going to go. And if you want him for wins, I don't know if you can get him for that, but he may help with your ratios because he was a good reliever. He's only 9% owned in CBS. Another guy who's been one of my guys for many years, and Ira, you can vouch for this, Danny Duffy. He looked good for the season opener. He looked very good. He's a possible 2-star for this coming week against Anaheim and Toronto. Not that great starts, but still, in his first start, he went 6 innings, gave up 2 hits and 5 strikeouts. He looked good, actually. The problem is, if you want him for wins, he's playing for Kansas City, so you may not get that many wins out of him. But he's a guy that you may actually can keep long term and just play matchup by matchup, just like John Gant. Also, these are guys that even though you can pick up this week, you can utilize them later down the road if they have good matchups coming up.
Yeah, I like the John Gant pick. He was a starter turned reliever turned starter. In the 200 innings pitched that he has since 2018, 3.39 ERA. Strikeout rate, not fantastic at 8, but that'll do it. 47% ground ball rate, and only 8% homer to fly ball rate, which over that period of time, to me, is not just fluky. So it's a guy who gets a lot of ground balls and limits homers. That will keep the downside limited. So if you're looking for a guy for some innings, and maybe it's just that it's the beginning of the season that he's only pitching 4 innings. I like St. Louis, so that's a nice sneaky thing for this weekend for the rest of the season. What about you, Glenn? Anyone to add?
Yeah, I'm going to go deep here with a couple of names. Wade Miley, who looked pretty good last time out, always kept the ball, on the ground. Swinging strike rate has been getting better. Gets a start against San Francisco and then against Cleveland. I think he's at San Francisco and then Cleveland, 2 teams that are having trouble, hitting the ball. So I really like that. And Aaron Sanchez, who's throwing the ball hard, looks like he's throwing free and easy. A home start against Cincinnati. Cincinnati's hitting, but San Francisco a tough place to hit. And then at Miami not hitting at all right now, and a great place to pitch. So those are 2 deep league 2-step starters this week.
I like those. You took Miley from what I was going to say. I'll throw in Dane Dunning. Looks pretty decent with the first game. This week he's playing at Tampa Bay and versus Baltimore. I think he can eke out a win in some of those. So far, 1 run, 3 hits in 5 innings with 6 strikeouts. I think somebody that you can take a gamble on, 30% owned for more deeper leagues, I would say. By the way, I looked up Matt Boyd. He's only 64% owned on CBS. He should be universally owned. He looked phenomenal in his first couple of starts. 12 innings, 2 ERA, 1 whip. If Matt Boyd is somehow available in your league, instant snatch up.
And he's
Great
a first
call.
half pitcher. He's a first half pitcher, so he does well in the first half. I would look to build him up, maybe even trade him, get something for him.
But remember, Matt Boyd is likely to end up pitching on a good team and a different team by the time you get to late July and August. So there may be some rejuvenation or more opportunity for wins as he ends up on a team that's going to be better than Detroit.
The truth is that I think the Detroit lineup is not as bad as people think. I think they've got a lot of promising guys, and I don't think they're one of the weakest teams in the league in terms of scoring.
Probably not, but he ends up. But with all the young pitching they have, I think they move him.
No, good point. Got one mailbag question. It's from JT, who asks, I guess appropriate for this show, can you talk about the strategy and execution of drafting as 2-person teams in auction drafts? I guess we all can, because we both very frequently draft in partners. So start with you, Glenn. What can you talk about your what you do roughly with Rick?
Yeah, no, look, absolutely. It's called Colton and the Wolfman for a reason, so we do what I want to do. No, I'm just kidding. Totally kidding. No, in all seriousness, you need to really prepare, and you need to have a plan, and you need to be on the same page, because there's no time to talk about what to do. One person has to do the bidding, and one person has to know what the team wants to do. So you need to know, this is our budget, this is our plan B, this is our plan C, and this is our valuation on the players. And one of the ways we accomplish being able to get through all the players is we have our smart system and rules of engagement. You want to use that system, that would be great. We're thrilled to have people follow us. But if not, just whatever your system is, stick to that system, and it will help you not only during the auction, but it'll help you get rid of having to spend time on players aren't within your system or your way of doing things. And the other thing I would say is you have to have your roles during the auction or during the salary cap draft. So I do the bidding, Rick charts the projections and what the other teams are doing. So invariably there'll be a time where he says to me, only 2 other teams need a second baseman, or only 1 other team is really desperate for a closer, or whatever he may say. So it's stuff that I wouldn't be able to do on my own. So if you're going to be two people, divide up the work so you can actually accomplish more during the auction than the one man or one person teams.
1,000%. Ruven and I do something similar. I mean, obviously, we split up the tasks differently. I do in live auctions, I do the bidding. In online auctions, actually, Ruvain's the guy who does the bidding. In terms of the charting the stuff, well, that's me. I go through the numbers. But in terms of looking for what team needs what, that's Ruvain. The one key component that Ruvain does, which is the biggest thing that I think we do that most people don't pay attention to, is the nominations. You can extract so much value from the room by the order of your nominations. And I don't buy that, well, you're only 1 out of 12 or 1 out of 15 teams. The way you order it really, really, really makes a difference. And knowing to slice up tiers and knowing where to get to nominate the top guy on board, when to know when you need to throw out somebody you want to get or potentially could get, and when you need to extract money from the room and how best to do it. Right? Don't just throw a top guy and say, well, this guy go for a lot. The top guy on board, throw him out. That'll get more money. Maybe for that one play, but over the next couple of picks, if you get people's mind off of pitchers and onto hitters, that might be the way to go. Picking the fourth best hitter in a tier might be better than getting the first, because once that fourth guy goes, the next three might follow. So there's a strategy of nomination that Ruvain does as well. Anything to add to that, Ruvain?
Yes, you should also play to each other's strengths. Don't try not to overlap everything you do. If someone is more or does more research on the prospects, and someone else does more research on the other thing, try not to overlap and just trust each other. And don't get into fights. You have to work as a team. You can't butt heads, especially when it comes to the draft. You have to be on the same page. Otherwise, the whole draft will go awry.
How do you work player conflicts, Glenn? So, if I'm higher on a player than Ruvain or Ruvain's higher on a player, then usually it comes, if how strong I feel or how strong Ruvain feels, or we'll talk it out and either come to a medium or I'll take his side or what. How do you resolve conflicts between Rick?
So there's a couple of different things. One, we will hash it out. And sometimes very quickly, one will just say, all right, we'll do it that way, and that'll be the end of it. If there's a serious debate, we'll go back and forth. We'll look up stuff, and you've heard me say this. I'll pull out the ATC projections, and he'll pull out like somebody else's projections, and we'll just debate these things, and we'll look at all kinds of stats. But here's the key: once the decision is made, it's our valuation. It's our guy, or it's not our guy. There's no ever. I mean, in 20 years, we've never said, oh, well, we got stuck with that guy because of you. Or, oh, because of me, we got this great pick. It's ours. And, we have the whole Top Gun rules of engagement thing. And there's a scene in the movie where Maverick says, I just happen to see a MiG-28. And Goose says, we. Sorry, Goose. We happen to see a MiG-28. It's always we. So that to me is a very, very big part of it. The other part is we have vetoes. It's just a guy we don't want. So Justin Turner, I just refuse to have him roster him on my fantasy team. I'm so bothered, so just viscerally offended by his behavior in exposing his teammates just to do a celebration that he's just not going to be on any of our teams. And Rick just says, okay, go next.
Right. No, I agree. And your point about the team is 1,000%. You can't do it any other way. And the truth of the matter is that if you play in a team for a while, it's second nature. You don't have to think to not do that. You second-handed, second nature of just doing that. Very interesting though, like about the players' debate, that you will debate them and have vetoes. I think for us it's a little bit different, because what we do is we start with the ATC base, and then the question is there a reason to go up or down from it? And so, if Ruvain feels strongly about a guy, okay, he'll debate the side and whether we'll pull it up from ATC. And maybe I'll feel very strongly against a guy, and I'll think of the reasons why to pull down, and then we'll adjust the projections, come up with a number, and those are the new numbers that you're comfortable with. So we have them. It's not like we're coming to a middle ground. We have the middle ground set with the ATC values. It's just a question of how strongly do we feel different, and to argue off of the middle. It's interesting, right?
That is interesting. And look, one of the reasons we don't have to do that much of that is so many players fail to meet our filter in the smart system and the rules of engagement. that we just know they're not going to be on our team for whatever reason. The players who, big money contracts in new places, the injury prone players, the Tatis types who've never played a full season despite all their talent. So we can cross off 40% of the league, not because we wouldn't be willing to take them at any price, but there's in the leagues we play in, they'll never fall to the level we're willing to go. So it gives us more time on the players we really need to spend the time, evaluating.
Yeah, and I think that that's a good way to do it. I think that a lot of people are less efficient with their time, and they want to go through every single player in the pool. And the truth of the matter is that you're best off really honing in on some percentage of the pool, whether it's 40% or whatever your threshold is, and learning that percent well, the players that you think that you're going to get at a better price than what the market's giving you, or I should say where you're higher than where the market is, and not you don't have to. If you think a player is going way higher than it should, why talk about it at all? It's just a waste of your time. Be efficient there, and this way you can save your time to learn more about the players you do want to go and to debate and to really hone in on the value and the direction and the plan of what you want to do. Anything to add, Ruvain?
No, I think you both hit it on the head pretty succinctly.
Good stuff. Glenn, this was fantastic. Really glad that you came on the show today. Before we let you go, why don't you just tell everybody where we can follow your work and where we can reach you and read you and all things Glenn Colton.
Sure, appreciate that. Well, every Tuesday night, 10 to midnight on Sirius XM Fantasy Sports Radio. It's Colton the Wolfman with Rick Wolf and myself. Always a lot of fun there, and hope you tune in, Sirius 210, XM87. You can catch columns Week That Was. I'll be starting that back up hopefully soon on fantasyalarm.com, and you can catch me on Twitter at Glenn Colton1. That's Glenn with two N's, as our friend Nando DeFino likes to point out, Glenn Colton1.
Definitely. If you have not caught the Colton and the Wolfman show on Sirius XM, you should get Sirius XM to listen. It's a phenomenal show. They get some of the best experts in town, talk about strategy, some stuff I've learned from you guys, some stuff that maybe I listen and I might not agree with it, but I love hearing it because there is a strategy that works with it, and it just great ideas flow through on the show, and you have fun. You do movies and stars every week, so it's you get some fantasy and some fun on the show.
Yeah, we tried. Thank you so much. We always appreciate the positive feedback. We'll have to get you on the show real soon, and then we'll have fun together.
Sounds good. Ruvain, why don't you tell us where we can see your work?
You can follow me on Twitter at MLB Injury Guru, where I tweet out injury updates daily on a daily basis, such as the fact that Tim Anderson is on the IL. He's 85%. He'll come back soon. James Paxton, elbow forearm issue after 24 pitches. Be worried about that. Trevor Rosenthal, we've mentioned him. He had thoracic outlet surgery, so he's basically done. George Springer, oblique strain, now a quad strain. That's not good at all. Cole Calhoun and both Trent Grisham set to come back in the next 10 days. AJ Puck, left bicep strain, stay away from him. And Sonny Gray will be coming back soon also, so you don't have to worry about it. But you can read all this stuff as well on my Rotoballer weekly article as well.
Yes. Sorry, Ruben, I didn't queue up your the injury report today. I'm so sorry about that.
That's fine. That's fine. I got in what I needed to say.
Brilliantly done how you brought that in there, Ruvain. Very well done.
Yeah, I gotta wedge it in somehow. That's all.
Good stuff. Yeah, read Ruvain's article every week and follow his Twitter feed. I mean, we're not talking about some random fantasy guy. We're talking about a guy who has diagnosed Tommy John surgery and deals with obliques and deals with leg injuries all day long. He knows the timetables because he treats them on a daily basis. I mean, fantastic knowledge. I can't tell you how much Ruvain's depth really helps. And, part of having a partner in fantasy when you're having an injury expert, that's a big advantage. So thank you, Ruvain.
No problem. And I can't count how many times I've had to examine you after you get softball injuries as well.
Well, our opening day in softball starts this Sunday. I am pitching. We lost last year in the semifinals in 11 innings. We left the bases loaded 3 times in the game.
Sounds like the Mets.
I was going to say, Giancarlo Stanton must be on your team.
I wish. Well, I went 5 for 5 in that playoff game, but that
Not
didn't.
bad.
I wasted that one. Anyways, that's it for our show. Once again, thank you so much, Glenn Colton, for coming on the show. From all of us here at Beat the Shift, we'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Beat the Shift podcast presented by Fangraphs. Follow us on Twitter at beat_shift_pod.